I'm going to make up a word. It's wizardization.
Yeah.
We are expected right now to have all of the answers, things that HR is neither equipped to understand nor has it. And there's a little bit of success theater going on in a lot of HR organizations I see. Look at the framework I'm building. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I know about the future. I have suspicions about anybody that calls themselves an expert in anything related to humans. There is no normal. Bring your authentic self to work. Nobody wants that. How to redefine the job requirements and expectations, competencies of a manager to not be a manager of people, but to now be a manager of agents. What are the things that we're doing that if we stopped, no one would notice? Somebody told me the other day that HR was like the spleen of the company. We're the spleen, man.
Welcome back to another episode of Joey's HR Lounge. So thrilled that you decided to join us wherever you are in the world. And this week, I have a special guest, Meagan Gregorczyk, who I have seen in different places all over the world. Meagan is a workforce transformation strategist. And at the conferences and events that we've attended together, I've always been inspired by her way of thinking that has been informed by her years of experience in some of the major brands that are changing the world as we know it. And she's got an interesting perspective on that. So I'd love to open up our conversation that we have with the audience. So Meagan, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, well, so let's first get into it. How did we connect?
We connected at I believe it was at a Future Talent Council event. It is an organization, it's a think tank based out of Stockholm that I've worked with for many years. And I find that they bring together just the most interesting people at the face of the intersection of technology and policy. And the reason I go to those meetings is to meet people like you, because I think as a group much more interested in figuring out the right questions to ask rather than just spouting off the right answers, which in today's world, I find quite handy.
Yeah, there are so many new questions that we have to ask ourselves. And I similarly enjoy participating at Future Talent Council events because it's just been nice to not only step outside of the bubble of like American HR, but also the bubble of the American workforce. So realizing that some of the best conversations that I've been a part of have been some of the ones where you're talking about student readiness for the workforce. And that's like a whole nother conversation that we should, as HR leaders, be talking about, but we don't always know where to go to have those conversations and who to have those conversations with. It's not always the career centers at universities or the ones that bring us in for job fairs, but there are some interesting change agents out there who are using their influence to make students ready for the future of work. So enjoyed meeting you there, and we've become good colleagues and friends. Let me ask you a first question to kick things off. If you had to describe the current state of HR in one sentence, what would it be?
I'm going to make up a word. It's wizardization. All right? Because I feel like all of us are the man behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
We are expected right now to have all of the answers. We see organizations really coming forward and expecting HR to step up in different ways to figure out, frankly, things that HR is neither equipped to understand nor has understanding. And when you talk about, figuring out how to make AI work for a workforce, that's a pretty big ask. And so I feel like we're a little bit caught off guard. I think all of us, it is hard to talk about openly because HR folks, we've always had a hard time feeling like we have that seat at the table. And so getting asked to step up with a business forward strategy is a big compliment, right? It's finally that seat at the table that we've always been asking for. And it feels to me as though we have this element of showmanship going on. There's a little bit of success theater going on in a lot of HR organizations I see. Look at the framework I'm building. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I know about the future. And there always has to be some element of like confidence. But I think we all need to chill out a little bit and stop trying to solve all of the things and figure out what the short-term things are that we have to figure out and how they benefit the long term, because we are not going to have all of the answers right now. And it's really important to say that.
Yeah. Well, and let's also, for those who are meeting you for the first time, let's paint a picture around your expertise. So I mentioned that you're a workforce transformation strategist. You've worked with companies of all sizes and who have a footprint across many different regions across the globe. For those who are meeting you for the first time, can you give a little scale and context to your expertise?
Yeah. So, I didn't start out in HR. I started off in sales. I carried a bag and I sold software over the phone for, I think, $18,000 a year was my first W-2 for American Express. I still have it. And what I've learned across my HR career, and I'll talk about those companies in a moment, it's that if you aren't a great salesperson, you cannot be a great HR person, because every day we are selling solutions into the business. And if you don't know how to sell those solutions in a really meaningful way, it's really hard to be taken seriously. So I would say if I've had any kind of success at all across my career, it's thanks to sales. I moved into learning and development, executive development. My entire family teaches. And what is really interesting about kind of my trajectory is that, I'm having trouble with this concept of expertise, Joey, if I'm being honest. You said it.
Okay, let's sit with that for a bit.
Yeah. You said expertise. And I had somebody call me an expert recently, and I just thought, are you talking about me? Right. And I have suspicions about anybody that calls themselves an expert in anything related to humans. Because,
And why is that?
yeah, look, the world is so nuanced and so changing, and especially in business, everything is so contextualized that I feel like there isn't a normal. I often just say to people, normal is a setting on a dishwasher. That's all it is, right? There is no normal.
Yeah.
And when there is no normal, it becomes hard to be an expert at anything. So to answer your question directly, I've worked in HR at companies like Broadcom, C8 Technologies. It's where I started out. They paid for me to go out and get my master's in adult learning theory, and they really kind of built me, and they let me play a ton. I got to travel the world and figure out what my own view of human development was. And at the end of the day, it's very simple. It is every single employee needs to be able to answer the question, who do I want to be next in this company? And if you can keep your sights on that and keep a really smart business head, you can go far. So after CA Technologies, I was speaking at a Women in Tech conference, and this woman who was the head of executive recruiting for Amazon saw me speak. And she came up to me and handed me her card, and she said, my name is Susan, and I want you to come work at Amazon with us. And it was just like this crazy moment of, I'm a farm kid from Indiana. And you think, my goodness, I can't believe that this is happening to me. And it was. And it started off a career across Amazon, Google, GE, a couple of startups here and there, ServiceNow, Snowflake, primarily in the tech industry. And what I've learned is that as HR professionals, the least important thing is for us to show up with our suitcase full of tricks and say, here are all the things that I'm going to do for you. The very most important thing that we can do is to just ask the question, how can I help? And shut up and listen. And they will tell you what they need. Right. Being in HR is hard. We talked a little bit about like the challenge of being an expert and being expected to have answers. And I think that it's very easy to get caught up in the trap of designing solutions for the business that prove your own worth, right? That justify your job. And so my premise has always been to answer the question, if I and or my team did not exist in this company, how would I design it? How can I design this solution for managing performance, for doing executive development, for learning and development, for operationalizing HR process across hundreds of thousands of employees? The question becomes, if I wasn't here, what would I design? Because what I find HR doing often is putting themselves at the center of a process to make sure that they can they can continue to have that seat at the table. And what I've found is that if you can figure out an ecosystem and design it so that you're not the center of it, people will take notice in a far more meaningful, incredible way.
You know, you said a few things that I parked on, and I didn't interrupt because it was such a great chat. But the first thing I wanted to address was what you said about there's no such thing as normal, and um, the thing about what you've just said in light of a a discipline that is driven by best practices and an industrial approach to work where we try to normalize everyone's inputs, outputs, and how we grade them. How does that land with you that like you have the strong conviction that there's no such thing as normal? And we even tell people to come and bring their full self to work, and my full self is not your full self. It's not my wife's full self. It's not my brother's full self, right? Like, how does all of that land with you? Because I think this is a part of the wizardry or the wizardization of HR is like, how do we get such disparate people to work together in a way that works for everybody while using tools that are changing left and right? What are your thoughts on that?
So that was a huge question. I will asterisk this answer by saying it's probably not the right answer, but it's just like random thoughts that are occurring to me. And I love that you asked that question, right? Your questions are so thoughtful. The element of first, let's get onto the topic of bring your whole self to work or your authentic self. Nobody wants that. Why are we saying that? Nobody actually in the workplace wants to see anyone's authentic self because if I am a total mess and I have got things going on and I bring that to work and I just, create a mess all around me and it's distracting and it's hard to work with. Nobody actually wants that, right? What I would love to see is us move past that phrase and to say to bring your best self to work. That doesn't mean a false self. That means a best self. You show up every day and say to the company and to your coworkers, how can I help? It's that question. And what I'm finding challenging, in the US specifically, there is so much kind of havoc being played in this area of DEI, and I find it very hard to think about how HR can create a culture of we when we increasingly live in a society of I.
Mm.
That's very difficult. Everyone wants to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be known. They want, they want all of the things about themselves to be understood and known and appreciated.
Yep.
And that's hard, right? I think that there is an element of being a grown up when you show up to work to say the best that I can hope for is that I can see a path for myself here, that I believe in the work that the company's doing, and that I want to be a part of this.
Mhm.
And I'm going to bring myself to do that because you can go out with your friends all weekend long and be your authentic self. But there does need to be this trade-off between being appreciated and being a part of something bigger than just yourself.
You, you know, one of the things that we do in our business is we we have pack names. So this was inspired by uh, realizing that there are countries where companies will even have mascots, or there'll be some unifying theme that everybody believes in. So for us, we're a wolf pack, and the premise of being a wolf pack is everybody brings their unique skills and abilities to contribute. And after a while, a couple of months in the organization, you get a nickname. Mine is Link. Uh, One reason it's Link is because my team sees me as the one of the most connected people in our network. So usually, if there's a challenge, I'm like, oh, okay, talk to so and so. Like we're friends. It should be fine. But also from the video game Zelda. Link is the main character who goes out and explores new territory, and so I love it because it's a cool name, and everybody's mantra and their pack name speaks to who they are and kind of like how they show up in the company. Um, And I love what you said. Even though you said this may not be the right thing, and it's okay for us to express ideas. We're in the lounge. This isn't, a keynote. It's not a lecture. It's us chatting professional to professional, in a safe space. And it's like, yeah, you know, do is it the right thing for companies to expect you to fit in the box? Or is it the right thing for companies to expect you to bring your box in a meaningful way that moves the business forward? And again, I don't know we're not here to discuss the right answer to that, but I just thought it was worthwhile to share for this conversation.
All right. So first of all, love that link. First of all, I'm no longer are you Joey? You're now linked to me forever.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
I love the Wolfpack idea because what we know about just leadership in general, right? I mean, how many
Mhm.
studies out there have been about the qualities of great leaders? What we know is that in the absence of leadership, people lack direction, they lack purpose, they lack mission. I don't love attaching to one person though, right? I do love the idea of attaching to a community. And that's what we were talking about, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
In terms of, what box you bring. So first of all, I heard there was a CEO that I worked for once, and an employee said, we have to start thinking outside of the box on this challenge. And he just kind of sat back and he had the coolest look on his face. And he goes, it's always so interesting when I hear people say, think outside of the box, because there is no box. There is no box. The box is an invisible box that you have drawn in your head. It doesn't
Mhm.
exist. And
Mhm.
so, you ask the question, do employees show up with their box and walk in, right? With their box of self? Or does the company show up with this box of collective? The ideal is that we can figure out a way where people can want to walk into the box of the room with their box of stuff and say, man, I feel at home here.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a part of something. I feel like I matter. And
Yep.
and at the end of the day, just as humans, let's not even talk about like HR. If somebody gets up in the morning and says to themselves, I matter to them in some capacity, it doesn't have to be, foo-foo. I matter to them.
Mhm.
They will keep coming back.
Yeah.
And that's what the heart of HR is. It's super interesting. Even the term HR, human resources. I mean, it's such an industrial term, right? It's kind of dreadful. Like where did we come up with that? It should be the HA team, human activation team. I don't know.
Mhm.
Um,
What do you think about people operations? Uh,
hey, there we go.
that's that's the other that's the other one that gets thrown around. People
Beautiful.
ops.
People ops is
Yeah.
fine. Fine. Resources is we got to stop that. We got to nip that in the bud.
Mhm.
But there is this element of showing up and being a part of collective that is incumbent upon leaders to create. And leaders can't make it about themselves, especially HR leaders. Again, what I always ask leaders to do is to ask them the question, what would you do to solve this if you weren't here? And once you start to solve for the collective, you get a lot farther than you do for idol worship.
Yeah. Well, let's take a hard pivot. I love setting the conversation around and centering it around people and the human experience at work. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the two-letter acronym that is permeating every organization right now. That's AI.
Don't do it, Joey. Don't
You thought I was going to say HR, but it's it's
Don't do
AI.
it. I know it's
But
if you combine HR and AI, it's hair. That's dreadful, isn't it? I mean, we have to come up with a better acronym than this. We have.
human artificial intelligence resources.
Ooh, I hadn't put it together. I hadn't put the terms together like that. It's wild you say that because I was reading a really interesting research study the other day talking about the role of the manager in
Mm,
organizations now and how is that going to change. And so what a lot of tech companies are doing, I'm actually working with a Fortune 50 company right now on
mm,
figuring out how to redefine the job requirements and expectations, competencies of a manager to not be a manager of people, but to now be a manager of agents.
Mhm.
So what does that look like? It's different than a project manager, right? It's different than either a project manager or a people manager. It really is all about how are you going to organize work as this manager of agents.
Mhm.
And even that concept, that's wild to me. I'm still trying to get my head around it because we have a lot of amazing humans in the world. And the question becomes, what are we going to do with all of it? We got to figure that out.
Yeah, we do because you know, there will only be more humans, and there will only be more moving in of new humans to the workforce and retiring of humans out of the workforce. So this challenge is always going to be something we need to solve with new rigor and new thought. And in this era of work, the conversation is it's about AI. And do you see real transformation, real positive transformation happening? Where do you draw the line between transformation that's good and experimentation that could also be happening, and we flag that as transformation?
All right. So
What are your thoughts?
I love that question. One is the first thing that came to mind is what is that? What is the creed for doctors? It's like essentially first do no harm. What is
Oh, yeah. Well, so yeah, in first aid, there's like the Good Samaritan
yeah.
Act.
Yeah.
But yeah, the do no harm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So first of all, I feel like companies need to start putting into place policies that they actually publicize and follow
Hmm.
around the employee experience, right? Here, what is our pact with employees to say, here's how we will use HR and here's how we will not use HR. Here are our
Hmm.
principles. Here's what we believe in. I'm not
You mean AI?
AI.
Here's how would you?
So
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
so sorry. Yeah.
yeah.
How
All good. All
here
good.
are the things that we will use AI for. I'm sorry. Here are the things that we will use AI for. And
Yeah.
here are the things that we promise you we will not use AI for.
Hmm.
Those kinds of policies are needed. People are terrified. They get up every morning, wonder if they're going to get some random wacky email at 5 a.m. letting them know that their job has been eliminated and to open, their web browser at 9 a.m. to join a group conference call for all of those that have lost their jobs. Like it's dreadful.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's dreadful right now. It's hard, especially in tech. And so, um, first we need to do what we can to ease fear internally. um, I don't know that we're doing enough on that front to give people the
Hmm.
level of stability to say, we are thinking about this and we've got you. We will act in your best interest as much as we can, according to business. The other one is that the other thing that came up for me when you were talking is this element of how we move toward being a more human culture in an AI driven world.
Hmm.
At the top of the podcast, you talked a little bit about students, right? You talked about what they bring. And, I have a nephew. He is 17 years old. He is, most teenagers, head down to his phone, just kind of
Hmm.
mesmerized all the time. And when I'm asking him questions about things, I ask him intentionally complex questions sometimes just to help him, like, how's he going to figure this out? Too often
Yeah.
he is going to AI. Um, I think that curriculums are going to have to change, right? Um, there are two kinds of AI right now that we're really talking about. One is generative AI, which is creation.
Hmm.
One is predictive AI, which is like, a yes or a no. There's a predictive answer. And what the research shows us is that the quality of a prompt that someone gives into AI dictates the quality of the answer for them.
Hmm.
And I'm really concerned about critical thinking right now. I'm really worried
Yes.
about systems thinking. And you're starting to see in the headlines a little bit more pop up about the importance of liberal arts educations. And when you talk about students or employees, those are actually the difference makers. Anybody can type a prompt into an AI, bot and get an answer.
Hmm.
But to be able to ask really thoughtful, critical questions that have a ton of depth, that's how we get depth out of AI. And so when I'm looking at students, when I'm looking at candidates for any type of role, I start asking them questions Like, what was the most crucible moment of your life, and what did you do to get yourself into a better place after that situation, right? Because there are a few elements of that get brought up. One is grit, which is very important, I would say. The other is they tell you what their thinking process is. And so that question is important. I ask questions like, what is the hardest piece of feedback that you ever got, and what did you do with it? Because that shows a bias for action, that shows agency and agility. So all of these things that we're talking about, none of them have to do with being an engineer or coding. They have to do with how are you going to show up to do the job that you were hired to do.
Right.
And we got to lean way into that. I don't even know if we're going to have, 4-year universities anymore. You're starting to see these really interesting elements of people being open to more flexible learning models. We just went down to Mexico, and we're at the Universidad de la
Libertad.
Libertad. Thank you.
Sí.
So embarrassing.
Hablo español un poco, pero nada más.
Lo siento is about all I have. Like, that was how I got around Mexico. People would speak to me, and I would just be so embarrassed as the dumb American and say, "Oops." No,
don't worry. That was my experience in France when I was in Paris in October. I know very little French.
At some points, like we need to just own that and say, we're sorry, we're trying to do better. Some of us are trying to do better. So when we were down there, this is a really interesting school model because it is based around entrepreneurship. And I had, honestly, like goosebumps talking with one of the facilitators there. And I say facilitators because they no longer have professors. It's more of a visiting professor model. It is the most expensive school in Mexico, university in Mexico. And it has incredible people from all around the country that are dedicated to becoming entrepreneurs, many of them in the tech industry. They are doing incredible work, by the way. And it's all about making Mexico a better place. And so they bring in these fascinating folks. The guy I talked to had worked at Microsoft. He lived in Spain. He was from Mexico originally, and he came back because he believed in the mission. And this dude was an expert in machine learning. And he combined he combined his curriculum with the art of philosophy and philosophical thinking and the soul of religion. So his curriculum was machine learning, religion, and philosophy. Right. And that, I think, is where we're going, because that makes a person lean in and go, oh, that's interesting. I sat and talked to them 2 hours. I couldn't stop listening. And those are the types of curriculums that are going to become, I think, the new way of thinking. Technology, you talked earlier about how HR always likes to show up with a structure. My question is, like, what if we stopped that? One of my questions that I ask to all of my HR teams when I go in and I get to start working with a group of folks is, what are the things that we're doing that if we stopped, no one would notice? And that question burns. That is not a fun question for people to answer, but it does free you up.
Yep.
Like, it frees you up a ton. And so I think a lot of these models that we show up with, those are the things that we can start to free ourselves from and start doing interesting thought experiments around things like machine learning and philosophy and religion to say, okay, where are we going next? And what are the jobs we design for the future? And we might design ourselves out of jobs, by the way. I think that's the hardest thing that I see in HR, right? When I go into our organization, typically I'm brought in to help drive HR transformation. And everyone in HR says that HR has to transform. And here's what I find after I get in. And it's usually really uncomfortable for both of us, for us to find out that when I say HR needs to transform, I mean by 70%. And when they say HR needs to transform, they mean by 3%. And oh, by the way, it can't affect my job function specifically. It's just down, right? I think figuring out and being brave enough to say, if I'm good enough, right? If I am good enough to design myself outside of a job, or out of a job, rather, if I'm good enough to design myself out of a job, then I promise myself that they will find more things for me to do. But you have to take that leap of faith.
Yeah. And I think HR is no different than maybe the marketing leader or the general counsel or the controller who has a natural desire for self preservation of like I need to own my desk because I don't know what other desks there are out there to own. But this era of work that we're in is unlike those of the past because it's compelling us to look elsewhere and look outward beyond the scope of what we normally do in our silo to find the new connections that need to be connected and the new technologies that we should be implementing. And that type of change is uncomfortable, not just for the HR person, but for a person in general. Because what you talk about, Megan, when you're like HR needs to change 70% and they want to change 3, what really is at the heart of that is identity. It's like,
Right.
who am I if you're asking me to change 70% of what I do around here or 70% of what people expect from me?
Right.
And am I on board with that change? And to tie it to your chat with the gentleman from the university, the whole machine learning and philosophy and religion, what what it what it compels me to think about is like we are requiring people to have a more informed level of ethics because these are new challenges. It used to be, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. Now it is, thou shalt not lay off 10,000 people because the technology is promising to do the same thing. And we don't have a playbook for that. So it's moving our ethics forward to embrace the new pros and cons that come with digital transformation.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting living out here and in the valley. I'm literally looking out of my window at Silicon Valley right now, just thinking,
Mhm,
man, we've got a lot of responsibility here.
mhm,
And there was an article published a couple of months ago, and the premise essentially was that the only people saying that the AI is going to transform the world in great ways are the people who are going to financially benefit. Those are the people. Those are the people singing the praises of the future of AI. And I've got some real big questions about what AI can actually do versus what it is purported to do. I don't think that it's going to replace humans nearly as quickly. Um, Certainly not at a societal scale, as they're saying, only because the question becomes if people don't have work, if we're talking about specifically in the United States, what does that mean for our societal infrastructure? A lot of the Norwegian countries have a lot of this figured out, right? They have good social
mhm.
structures in place. None of that exists here because we serve the capitalistic lords. Like that's who.
Do you think it's too late for us?
Nah, I don't think so, but I think it's going to take like a real reckoning and a real pushback by people. Um, there's a saying by a former politician, "Let's get in some good trouble," right?
Yep.
And I,
John Lewis. Yep.
yep, John Lewis. And if I mean, we need to all really bring that on board and say we do have rights as
Hmm.
citizens. I grew up in Indiana in a rather poor area. I was just there visiting family, and one of the things happening there is that you've got companies coming in buying up all of this land for data centers,
Mm,
and the politicians are not stopping them because they are a quote, business friendly state. And
mhm.
what is very quickly going to happen is that all of the farmland is going to be covered up with data centers. Is that really the world that we want to live in, right? Is there not some oversight and responsibility of the government at some level to say, we do have a responsibility for creating a great country to live in, right? What we're surrounded by in terms of toxins, what we're surrounded by in terms of the availability of work. I don't think it's too late. But in the US specifically, we do have a group of billionaires that are pulling a lot of strings right now. And the implications that HR people have because of those decisions are big. There's no HR leader out there that wants to send out a text at 5 a.m. saying your job's been eliminated, don't come in today. Nobody wants that. But until we start standing up and saying people deserve better, not much is going to happen. It's the whole return to office thing. This one really gets me. I think you and I might have talked about this in Mexico, because I'm here and I'm seeing traffic's getting worse. It is not uncommon at all for people to have a 2-hour commute each way.
Yeah, especially if you're getting around the Bay, Oakland to Menlo Park.
That's right, Oakland to Menlo Park. It is brutal, and the return to office really was driven not by business leaders and HR leaders still are talking about how, teamwork makes the dream work. But let's be honest, what actually is making return to office happen is that the banks are calling in to those business leaders and CEOs saying, if you don't get people back in these buildings, everything's going to go, I'm trying to think of a PC term here. Things are.
We get it.
Yeah. So
a lot of it goes to your capitalist point of if rents aren't paid and there are defaults, we might see what we had with the automotive bailouts. And if for those who are reading, the financial newspapers, we're hearing about, funds being invested into banks to cover defaults. Intermittently, I think there have been a few over the past couple of months because of auto defaults, credit card defaults, mortgage defaults. So yeah, there are systems and checks and balances that exist, and return to office falls in the crosshairs for what you're saying. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So there was it's been a few years back now, but there was a guy named Cory Doctorow that came up with this term called enshittification. Have you heard this?
No.
All right. It's so good, right? So enshittification is the deliberate, gradual degradation of platforms and services as they prioritize profit maximization over user experience. All right. So basically what it is, it's like 3 stages. So you attract the users, i.e. candidate attraction. Let's bring this back to the HR world, because he was talking about tech, but I think that there's a lot here that applies to HR. So you attract the users with a good service, i.e. a promise of a great, employment brand, employee contract. And then you start in the second phase, abusing users to benefit business customers, right? So it's like, well, employees are important, but also this is a business. And that is true, right? The third phase of enshittification, though, as he defined it for tech, is that you start exploiting business customers to keep all the value for the platform. So it feels to me as though HR has a moral standard here. And there are going to have to be HR leaders, let me be very clear, that look at the CEO and go, I'm not in. I'm going to go, I'm not in. I'm not in for this.
When you think about that, for the HR technology buyer, all right, so whether that's CHRO, CFO, CEO, what sort of questions or accountabilities do you think the buyer needs to bring to that conversation to spot that happening, or to hold a vendor accountable to that not happening?
Okay, so I think internally it comes down to getting really clear about what you want the user experience to be.
Okay.
And that's hard to do, especially when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar corporations who have contracts with other companies, right? So very often you'll have, I'll install your technology if you install my technology. That happens all the time. And HR leaders often get stuck with suboptimal technology because, the CEOs went out for a beer and all of a sudden you got to install their technology. So that isn't great. But I do feel like internally before you go to look at vendors, you need to get clear about what you will accept from a user experience standpoint and what you won't. And that's where the what you won't part is the important part. Because when you go out to assess vendors, being really clear about what you don't want for your users is actually almost more important than what you do, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah.
yeah, and the HR tech space it's always been a land of promises, right? In the next rev, you're gonna get this, and 2 releases down the road, it's coming, we promise. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So you better make sure that your user experience is at least met with some degree of solve with what the technology can do today, because those promises often do not come quickly enough.
Well, I think that's a good segue into this final question I want to ask you, because we're talking about the tools of today, but what we're really getting at is the HR leader who is future focused. So if you were advising an HR leader that wants to be relevant, say 5 years from now, what capabilities do you think, in addition to what we've unpacked today with respect to evaluating tech, understanding the influences of capitalism, realizing your team and whether people are bringing their full selves or fitting within the box, what capabilities should HR professionals be hardwiring into themselves today to have continued confidence and success in their ability for tomorrow?
Whew. My goodness, how do you predict the capabilities of the future when you don't know what the future's going to be? And I suppose the world always
Yeah.
has been that way a bit. Um, this idea of adaptability, and being able to pivot and identify multiple solutions and to be willing to pull the plug when things are not working is so important.
Mhm.
An example of that I'm seeing right now, and I want to preface this by saying I don't have the right answer, right? But I
Okay.
also know that we're not headed in a great direction in this, all right?
Okay.
So back in the day, there were things like the Corn Ferry competency model, right? And an organization can go down a path with that. It can be very helpful. Used to a certain degree, though, it can become an organization's worst nightmare because you are constantly in this state of updating the taxonomies. Like, it gets really complex. And what we found over decades is that it really didn't do that much for us. What I'm hearing folks talk about now, as though it's this silver bullet that nobody's ever thought of before, are skills taxonomies.
Mhm.
And I look at that and I'm like, what is everybody else seeing that I'm not seeing? It's the same problem. It's literally the same problem. We are just coming in with a different word. Skills are not new, by the way. We're just coming in with a different word and trying to insert another taxonomy to show that AHR has the right framework, right? So it's not that I have the right answer, but being intellectually honest with ourselves about HR
Mhm.
practitioners, about things that are going to help the business move forward and the things that aren't, is probably the biggest. It's the hardest thing to do, and it's the most important thing to do.
Mhm.
Because once we get clear about the things that we have been doing that are performative, we are free to become somebody new collectively. So one of the elements that I really struggle with, and I don't have the right way forward as a quote best practice. I mean, come on, best practice doesn't exist. That's not a thing. Uh, Context is too important now.
Mhm.
You know, when you talk about learning programs for employees, look, I've been in this business for 20 years. It used to be that I stood on a stage and bestowed knowledge to people. That's how they got their quote, their education, right? Those days are gone, man. Like, done. It's over. Because first of all, you have to think about the content being applicable to the lowest common denominator in the room and the highest common denominator in the room.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that the world has just changed. Technology has democratized growth.
Mhm.
Employees that want to grow will grow, and they don't need HR to do it for them. You know, this idea of employee growth and career growth and how we've attached it to L&D, that feels like a false idol to me now. If we stop spending these millions and millions and millions of dollars on employee learning programs, what else might we do with that money? Right? To say to employees, here are all the technologies that you can use to go out and become the next version of yourself. Godspeed.
Mhm.
What would we do with ourselves then? Those are the interesting questions. But to your point, Joey, that requires being brave enough to let go of your identity. That I am the HR person and I know what to do. Somebody told me the other day that HR was like the spleen of the company. The spleen, Joey. Spleen. And I was like, I don't even know what the spleen does.
That's like the least sexiest body part.
For sure. Like rivaled only by maybe the gallbladder. Not
Right.
sexy. Yeah. And they
Right.
were like, look, everything, all of, the old saying, and I'm, pardon my language, HR people that are very compliance driven, rolls downhill. Like bad things roll downhill. And what this person said to me was, the spleen plays a role in just figuring out what to do with all the bad stuff. And that's what HR is tasked with. It's not a
Yeah.
good place to be. So at one point, we are the spleen of the company figuring out how to filter out all of this bad stuff and these toxins. And at the same point, we are supposed to be the great hope of the company, building future leaders and becoming a great culture. And
You want to know the scary part?
being both of those things at once is so hard. Tell me, what's the scary part?
So, of course, I had to Google what does the spleen do? And it says, while important, the spleen is not essential for survival.
Stop.
If removed due to damage or disease, other organs like the liver can take over many of its functions, though the risk of infection increases.
Joey. Oh my God, we're the spleen. What are we going to do? We're the spleen, man. See,
We're gonna change our body part. That's the first
that's
thing.
the first
I don't want to be anything that's non-essential.
correct. And I mean, it's that. Okay, first of all, hilarious. I love you that up. But second of all, that goes to the point about your question about the HR executive of 5 years from now.
Yeah.
What can be farmed out? There is so much in your remit, I'm guessing, that could better fit into a finance org, that could better fit into an operations org. There are things out there. Put them back in the business. Stop acting like we are the expert of those things because we're not. We're not experts in these things. We have to figure out what our identity is because we can't say that we're 50 things and be good at all of them, but we could for sure pick 10 and be amazing at them. And
Love that.
yeah, and being wise enough to know what levers to pull and what to pick. I think that's the key HR executive.
Well, I think that was a mic drop moment. We can go ahead and land the plane. Meagan, how can people get in contact with you, find you, work with you? What are the best ways to keep in touch?
Yeah, for sure. So just ping me on LinkedIn. My account is open. I'm easily findable. To spell my last name, it is all of the consonants. I'm kidding. It is Gregorczyk. So Meagan Gregorczyk. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I love philosophical conversations. I love pushing a few buttons, and I love getting into good trouble. So hit me up if you are interested in any of those things.
Love that. I feel like this was such a rich episode. So we may even go ahead and break it into 2 parts. But this was such a fun time with you as always. And hopefully our paths will cross well, they're already crossed in 2026. But in the rest of the year, hopefully you get a chance to connect IRL. But thanks for being on Joey's HR Lounge and sharing a little bit about yourself, your perspective, and your lived experiences. And I know that our audience is benefiting from it. So until next time, everybody, take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Joey. Bye.